Warhammer is a franchise that is near and dear to many people's hearts. Mostly full-blown nerds, but I digress. Starting out as a tabletop game in 1983, it has become a franchise that many people are ride or die for, despite the reception for a lot of it to be very hit and miss with quality. Its rich lore, endless possibilities for storytelling and gameplay aside, Warhammer and its alternate, more sci-fi series Warhammer 40k have always been something that I've glanced at from afar, but I never dipped my toes into. The Space Marine series of games would prove to be the thing that would break this seal on the beloved franchise for me, and I am quite glad that it has. First released in 2011, Warhammer 40k Space Marine was developed by Relic Entertainment. The game takes place on planet Graia, a forge world dedicated to manufacturing weaponry for humanity's long war against the Xenos, or just anything not human really, for control of the stars. The planet has been overrun by orcs, and a vital war asset called a Titan has been found on the planet. So you get sent in as Captain Titus of the Ultramarines with your squad to go in and kick some Xeno ass. As with pretty much every game plot, things don't exactly go to plan, so the Ultramarines must step up and show exactly what kind of Giga Chad super soldiers they are. The story is about as straightforward as the game's level design is, which is to say, unfortunately so. As an introduction to Warhammer 40k, I think the game actually does a good job of advertising exactly what this series is about, and it isn't without charm, but the depth of the story and quality of writing aren't enough to be winning any glory from the Emperor. Joining you on your crusade against the orcs are your two subordinates, the seasoned warrior Sidonus and the inflexible and by-the-books rookie Leandros. The plot has a lot of opportunity over the course of the game to show the differences between these super soldiers, the Ultramarines, and how their long years of battle and conquest can affect them, contrasting with a relatively new squad member. But satisfying interactions are few and far between, and have as much nuance and depth of a kiddie pool. I'm not saying that a space fantasy game with orcs needed to be the next Spec Ops The Line or anything, merely that there was potential here for solid writing, but interactions between the crew rarely amount to more than giving orders and eye-sirring. No spoilers or anything here, but my favourite character in the game actually ended up being the leader of the orcs, even though pretty much all of his dialogue is just, "Oi, Space Marine, get over here!"
Get off my ship, Space Marine!
He's just so goofy, I love it. I'm sure for long-time Warhammer fans that this game has a good bit of lore bone to chew on. Let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed the story a lot due to already being a fan and having the game flesh out and show you more lore for the universe. If you're watching this review on your phone or you're watching on a second monitor at home, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you're watching some Gears of War gameplay. Being a third-person shooter released in the second half of the PS360 console generation, this game really takes a lot of inspiration from the big trend of over-the-shoulder cover-based shooters such as Gears of War, Uncharted, and those really underrated Transformers Cybertron games. Space Marine ditches the hiding behind cover aspect a lot of these share, after all no true Space Marine would hide from filthy Xenos, and instead adds a bigger focus onto the melee combat. Both the guns and the melee weapons feature variety, with some suiting some situations more so than others. At first, melee combat looks and feels like a slightly stronger version of every standard melee system of the time, but after a little bit of playtime, you can see what makes this game differ. Every melee weapon in the game has a basic combo and a stun, but some of them have an extra move or two. There is an all too typical shield system protecting your health bar. When shields run out, health runs out, and the only way to regen health is to use your stun on a weak or wounded enemy, and then perform an execution on them. If you've played the Doom reboot from 2016, then you'll have a pretty good idea of how this works, but it's a little different here in that the animations take several seconds to play out, and if you're trying to regain health while enemies are still around you, you can very easily be killed while trying to execute an enemy for health. I like the way this system works since you only have to really do this in real emergencies thanks to the shield, but it also makes you have to play it smart when trying to regain health. Do you try and rush into a pack of orcs and quickly heal and run out? Or do you thin the pack with only a sliver of health and then heal back from only the remaining stragglers? These were the challenges that I had to face throughout the whole game, as enemies only get more and more difficult to execute the further into the game you are. There are 4 different melee weapons the game offers, and they each have their own purposes. A basic starting weapon, one better suited to fleshy enemies, one better for armor, and one that is insanely strong but slow and limits your use of ranged weaponry. Speaking of the guns, I'm pleased to say the variety in this game is fairly small, but all with their own purposes. There are nearly a dozen ranged weapons on offer, and each of them are useful in their own ways. The list comprises things like a pistol, assault rifle, snipers, shotguns, and other fun weapons, but they all feel good to use, and even I, who usually only plays shooters with an AR and a shotty, actually found use in every weapon available. You're limited to only a pistol, assault rifle, and 2 other weapons if you're choosing at a time, so it becomes a bit of a balancing act to have the right weapons for the job at the time, and also balancing ammo. The last mechanic I want to talk about is the Fury mode. There's a gauge in the bottom left corner of the screen that slowly fills up as you damage and kill enemies, and when it's full, you can trigger Fury mode, which is pretty much the same thing as Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry or Rage of the Gods from God of War. As you're in Fury mode, your health automatically regenerates, your melee damage is increased, and if you aim your weapon, then you enter into a slow-mo mode, so you can take more precise shots. While this system isn't bringing anything new to the table, I do like that it builds back up quickly enough that if you have it, you may as well use it because you'll likely build that meter back up by the time your battle is over. The weapons aren't the only thing with variety here. I'm pleased to say that even though a common complaint I have with games of this style is that there aren't a lot of enemy types, that criticism doesn't fall here in Space Marine. All throughout my roughly 8-hour journey through the campaign, I was being introduced to new enemy types with not only quite unique and varying designs, but also each having their own different strengths and weaknesses. I managed to really get a feel for which weapons worked particularly well for which enemy types, which made me feel like a seasoned Space Marine in my own rights. The one thing that doesn't have stellar variety is unfortunately the level design. This is where Space Marine falls into the same trappings so many games did in this era. Almost every level is a completely linear pathway, stopping room by room, fighting enemies, then only going to the next room ahead just to do the same thing over and over. The only reason for deviating from the main path at all is if you're looking for the nearly 50 audio logs found in the game. These can give some mildly interesting backstory into characters in the game and the events that happen prior to the start of the game. If you're playing through the game for the second time, or simply don't care about some extra lines of dialogue hidden around, there is literally nothing to make you not just run in a straight line through the entire game. This isn't helped by the fact that a lot of the levels are very samey visually. I'm sure you're all very surprised to hear that a planet ravaged by orcs has a lot of destroyed buildings and tunnels to be travelled through. This isn't to say there are no interesting areas present, there definitely are, and a handful of missions do shake the gameplay up enough. My favourite of these being some slightly more open but still linear missions where you wear a boost pack on your back so you can boost into the air and then slam down with the righteous wrath of humanity onto the orcs. The levels themselves are probably one of the weak points of the game as far as the graphics go. In my personal opinion, this era of graphics was never particularly pretty even at the time. But when they're so linear and samey and closed in, it just doesn't make it very interesting to look at. I am pleased to say that the character models themselves and the enemies have aged fairly well, and at 4K, I actually thought the Ultramarine's armor looked really nice. The last part of the game to critique would be the sound. The soundtrack itself is definitely not bad at all, being mostly solid orchestral music, but also is fairly easy to tune out. After finishing the game, I can't say there's a particular song that I remember, but while playing, the music definitely pumped me up and made me yell "Hell yeah!" as I carried on my mission for glorious humanity. I do think the voice acting in the game is particularly strong. Everyone is cast in such a way that the moment you hear a character talk, you can feel exactly who they are and what they're about. I really love the voice acting on the orcs in particular. They have this heavy-ass British accent that makes them feel like the intergalactic equivalent of a Liverpool pub whenever they lose in the Premier League. I swear to God, I'd better hear an orc say "in it bruv" in the sequel or I'm going to revolt. Space Marine also has a full multiplayer suite on offer if that happens to tickle your fancy. I'm not much of a multiplayer guy if I'm being fully honest, but I checked out the section and it includes both a PvP section with several modes and maps on offer as well as a co-op mode focusing on PvE. Both of these modes contribute to your level and there seems to be a customization feature on offer to make your Space Marine truly your own. I did try to get a match of both PvP and PvE, but unfortunately, due to the age of the game and living in Australia, I couldn't even find a single person to be matched with. If the upcoming Space Marine 2 also has online multiplayer, then I'd definitely be keen on checking it out because it sounds like a really fun concept. Let's just hope that the game's combat has a little more depth because despite being fun to play, I can't see enough depth here for someone to truly excel at the game. All in all, I definitely had a good time with Warhammer 40k Space Marine. Despite a pretty straightforward story, there is definitely a very compelling world that this is only just scratching the surface of. The gameplay doesn't really bring anything new to the table here either, but I can't say that at any point I stopped enjoying my time. I personally feel like this is a very safe video game. Everything it does well. Its only flaw being that it doesn't really excel in any areas other than fun, which is very subjective. I think this game is based as all hell if I'm being honest. My own personal liking for the game is stronger than what I feel its objective quality is. The score I'll be giving Space Marine is a 7 out of 10. But it'll be one of the most fun 7 out of 10s that you'll ever play. I absolutely feel like there is a place for games like this, games that don't try to push the boundaries of what games can be, but just want to be a basic, straightforward and fun experience. I respect the hell out of this game for that, and I'm super excited to be playing both Space Marine 2 when it comes out, and other Warhammer games in the future. Now forgive me, my brothers, for I must leave. The time has come for my long study of the Codex Astartes. I'll see you on the field of battle, my brothers, for the glory of the Emperor!